So, I want you to take a look at your wrist for a second.
Right, or, if you prefer, just picture a standard clock face in your head.
Yeah, exactly. And notice how it's divided into 60 minutes.
And, well, every one of those minutes is divided into 60 seconds.
Right. And then think back to geometry class.
Oh, boy.
Right. But think about a circle. A circle has 360 degrees.
Exactly.
And we interact with these numbers, this very specific, almost arbitrary way of slicing up time and space literally every single day of our lives.
We completely take it for granted. I mean, we don't even think about it.
No, not at all. But what if I told you that every time you check your phone to see, if you have 15 minutes left in a meeting, you are directly, tangibly inheriting a system that was invented by people emerging from muddy, terrifying swamps over 5,000 years ago?
It's honestly one of those invisible threads of history.
It really is.
It connects our hyper-modern, digital, cloud-based lives right back to the very literal wet dirt of the ancient world.
Wow. Yeah, dirt is a good word for it.
Right. Like, you might be looking at an OLED screen right now, but the underlying math governing the time on that screen, well, it was originally carved into wet clay with a piece of chopped-off river reed.
That is just completely mind-blowing to me.
It's wild.
And that is exactly what we are getting into today on this deep dive.
I am so ready for this.
We are pulling from some really incredible source material for this one. We're looking at excerpts from the acclaimed book, The Penguin History of the World, 6th edition.
Yes, by J.M. Roberts and Odd Arnwestad. An absolute classic.
It is, and if you've ever seen the cover of this particular edition, it features that iconic, just massive swirling painting of the Tower of Babel.
Oh, yeah. Peter Bruegel's painting, I believe.
Right, which, as we'll see as we get into the weeds today, is just incredibly fitting for the civilization we're about to explore.
It really sets the tone.
It does. So our mission here is to explore what historians call the forcing house of human civilization.
Ancient Mesopotamia.
Exactly. But we aren't just going to rattle off a dusty timeline of kings you can't pronounce.
Please no. Nobody wants that.
Right. We want to understand why civilization happened there, of all places.
What it actually felt like for the people living through it.
Yes. And how they drafted the original functional blueprints for writing, law, and society that we are still literally using right now.
It's going to be a journey.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to set the physical scene first because, well, everything flows from the geography here.
It absolutely does. You can't understand the people without the landscape.
So where exactly are we, and what does the world look like when the story starts?
So we are focusing on the southern part of Mesopotamia.
Okay.
Our region that would eventually become known as Sumer.
Sumer, got it.
Yeah. And geographically, I want you to picture a stretch of land about 700 miles long.
That's quite a stretch.
It is. And it's almost entirely defined by two massive, powerful river valleys, the Tigris and the Euphrates.
Which today broadly corresponds to modern-day Iraq, right?
Yep. Exactly. And to truly understand the culture that grew here, you absolutely have to understand the dirt.
Dirt.
Yes. The physical environment didn't just, passively influence the society.
Right.
It violently dictated the absolute necessity for it.
Violently dictated. I like that phrasing.
Well, the environment here presented a profound, almost cruel paradox to early humans.
Okay, what kind of paradox?
On one hand, you had this watery, challenging, malarial marshland. It was low-lying, completely prone to catastrophic flooding, and just incredibly hostile to human settlement.
Right. So if you are a roaming band of hunter-gatherers looking for a place to settle down, this does not exactly look like premium real estate.
Not at all.
You'd probably look at the swamp, the insects, the blinding sun, and just keep walking.
You would think so, right? But there's the other side of the paradox.
Okay.
The soil beneath that swamp was unbelievably rich.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Over millennia, the drainage from upcountry, from the Zagros Mountains, combined with the annual floodings, it had deposited this incredibly fertile silt.
So it's basically nutrient soup.
Exactly. So you have this environmental trap.
A trap.
Yeah, the land is a watery nightmare that will actively try to kill you. But if you can somehow manage to tame it, the agricultural potential is explosive.
Wow.
There's a staggering calculation from the source material regarding this that really puts it into perspective.
Lay it on me.
Around 2500 BC, the yield of grain in southern Mesopotamia actually compared favorably with the best Canadian wheat fields of the modern era.
Wait, I have to pause on that because that is a massive claim.
It is.
2500 BC, we're talking about ancient farmers using, what, wooden plows dragged by oxen.
Pretty much, yeah. Mud and wood.
And you're saying that rivaled the output of massive modern Canadian agricultural operations.
That's what the historians calculate, yes.
The kinds of operations today that use, like, GPS-guided combined harvesters and synthetic nitrogen fertilizers and genetically modified seeds.
I know, it sounds impossible. But that raw, natural fertility of the Mesopotamian silt was simply unmatched.
That's insane.
The soil was just a loaded spring of biological potential.
Right.
But, and this is the massive civilization defining, but that fertility came with terrifying strings attached.
I figured there was a catch.
A huge one. If you were living there, rain was practically non-existent.
Really? No rain?
Very little. It was slight and entirely irregular, so you could not rely on rain to water your crops.
Okay.
And those two life-giving rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, they were incredibly dangerous.
More dangerous than other rivers, like I'm thinking of the Nile in Egypt.
Exactly the right comparison. Unlike the Nile, which flooded with almost calendar-like predictability.
Right, the Egyptians could basically set their watches to it.
Yes. But the Tigris and Euphrates were fed by snowmelt in the mountains far away.
Oh, so it depends on the weather up there.
Exactly. So their floods were sudden, violent, and entirely capricious.
Terrifying.
And to make matters worse, because they deposited so much silt, the riverbeds were often situated above the level of the surrounding plain.
Wait, explain that. How can a river run higher than the land around it?
It's a geological process that's actually common in heavy silt rivers.
Okay.
The river carries tons of dirt. As it slows down on the flat plain, it drops the dirt, building up its own bed.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so over centuries, the river essentially builds a raised aqueduct for itself.
That is bizarre.
So if the water volume suddenly spikes from a spring, melt in the mountains, and the water breaches those raised banks.
It doesn't just flood a little bit of the shoreline.
No. It cascades down onto the plain and obliterates everything in its path.
Wow.
It creates a massive, stagnant inland sea.
So I look at that setup and I see an incredibly harsh startup incubator.
Oh, I like that.
You know those aggressive corporate accelerator programs where they lock a bunch of ambitious people in a room, give them totally impossible deadlines?
Right.
And say, if you can survive this pressure cooker, the payoff is $1 billion company.
Yeah, that's actually a brilliant way to look at it.
That's the Tigris and Euphrates. If you can survive the extreme conditions, the extreme capriciousness of the water, the payoff is this massive, unprecedented surplus of food.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Canadian wheat harvest.
Right. But let me challenge the premise here for a second.
Sure, go for it.
If the soil was so insanely fertile, couldn't people have just lived peacefully, on isolated family farms? Like, just throw some barley seeds in the mud, back up and relax. Why go through all the trouble of building massive walls and inventing complex, stressful societies?
It's a really great question. But the reality of the environment makes that isolated family farm completely impossible.
Really? Why?
You simply could not survive in that environment alone or in a small family unit. It's a dynamic of extreme challenge and extreme opportunity.
Okay, walk me through that.
To access that fertile soil, to get that harvest, you have to control the water.
Right, because of the flooding and the drought.
Exactly. If you don't control the water, you either die of drought when the river is low, or you drown when the river breaches its banks.
Neither sounds great.
No.
Yeah.
And you cannot build a levee to hold back a raging elevated river by yourself.
Ah, I see.
You can't dig miles of drainage canals to reclaim marshland with just your wife and kids.
Right. The sheer physics of moving that much earth requires a massive labor force.
Exactly. To survive, the ancient people absolutely had to work together.
They had no choice.
None. They had to build massive mud platforms to raise their homes above the floodline.
Wow.
They had to bank the earth, dinch the water, and carry it away in a highly coordinated fashion.
So this wasn't some optional kumbaya community building exercise?
Not at all. It was a strict prerequisite for survival.
So the environment literally forces you to cooperate. It's cooperate or die.
And think about the sociological chain reaction that kicks off.
Okay, let's play that out.
The moment you have complex collective action, say 50 or 100 families working together to build a 5-mile drainage system, you suddenly need management.
Oh, right. You can't just have everyone digging randomly.
No. You need someone to organize the labor. You need someone to decide where the canal goes.
Someone has to draw the blueprint.
And crucially, you need someone to settle disputes when one guy isn't digging his share.
Or when someone tries to siphon off more water than they are allotted.
Exactly. Human nature hasn't changed.
No, it hasn't.
So this collective need directly inevitably drove the creation of authority.
Wow. So management is born out of mud.
Over time, this labor management evolved into the first towns.
Okay.
The local deity's shrine was placed in the center of the town on a raised platform.
For flood protection.
Right. And the chief priest exercised authority not just as a spiritual leader, but as the representative of that god, managing the communal labor and the communal surplus.
Okay, so you've got people banding together, surviving the floods, building these raised towns, and growing literal mountains of barley.
Yes.
But as they succeed, they hit a new, entirely human-made crisis, don't they?
They do.
Because as that massive food surplus allows the population to boom, things start to get tense.
Very tense. Because villages need more land to feed their growing population.
Yeah, more mouths to feed.
So what do? They start reclaiming more and more of the marshland on the edges of their territory, pushing their borders outward.
Uh-huh.
And eventually, men from one village, expanding their reclaimed land, run face-to-face into men from another village doing the exact same thing from the opposite direction.
Oh, wow. The buffer zone is gone.
Exactly. The wild, untamed marsh that used to naturally separate these communities has been turned into flat farmland.
And suddenly you are staring right at your neighbor across an irrigation ditch.
And that proximity forces a binary choice upon these communities.
Which is?
Fight or cooperate.
Ah.
And what's fascinating is that regardless of which option they chose, it required a massive new agglomeration of power.
Explain that. Why does either choice require more power?
Well, if Village A and Village B choose to fight over the land, they need an army.
Right.
They need a general to lead that army. They need fortified structures, weapons, and logistics.
True. What if they cooperate?
If they choose to cooperate and merge, they need a much higher level of bureaucracy.
Oh, yeah. Combining two administrations.
They need complex treaties, integrated irrigation management that spans both territories, and a hierarchy that supersedes the local village priests.
So either way, the state has to grow.
Whichever path they chose, conflict or integration, it led directly to banding together in bigger, tighter units for self-protection.
That is amazing.
This is the direct causal mechanism that invents the walled city-state.
It is brilliant to look at it that way.
Yeah.
The physical reality of the mud, the water, and the grain inevitably, mechanically creates the political reality of walls, armies, and kings.
You can trace a straight line.
Which brings us to a massive logistical hurdle.
Oh, yes.
Once you have these walled cities, places like Uruk with, what, tens of thousands of people?
Up to 50,000 at its height, yes.
And you have these giant communal surpluses of grain stored in the temple.
Right.
Keeping track of who contributed what, who owns what, and who gets what rations. It becomes an absolute nightmare.
A total administrative nightmare.
Because the human brain can only hold so many favors and debts in its memory.
We just aren't wired for it at that scale.
When memory fails at that scale, society collapses.
It falls apart entirely.
And that necessity leads to one of the greatest cognitive leaps in history.
It really is.
This is where the story pivots from digging dirt to hacking the human mind.
Yeah.
How do we get from surviving in the mud to inventing writing?
It actually starts, surprisingly enough, with a technological leap in how they handled mud.
More mud, of course.
Always mud. It starts with pottery.
Okay.
If you look at the archaeological record in this region, there is a very specific type of artifact called Uruk pots.
Named after the city of Uruk.
Exactly. Now, if you look at earlier Neolithic pottery from other regions or older times, it's often quite beautiful.
Like painted and decorative.
Yeah. Carefully crafted by hand, individualized. It's art.
Okay.
The Uruk pots, by contrast, are incredibly dull.
Dull.
They're completely boring. Just plain, identical bowls.
Boring seems like a really weird milestone for human progress.
Doesn't it?
Usually we look for beautiful art as a sign of advancement.
Well, they are boring aesthetically, but technologically they're revolutionary.
Why?
Because the reason they are boring is that they are mass-produced.
Oh.
These pots are made in standard forms, uniform sizes, and they are turned on the very first potter's wheels.
Ah, the wheel makes its entrance.
Yes. And this is the first time we see the wheel used in this rotational manufacturing capacity.
Storing kinetic energy to spin the clay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is long before it was turned on its side and used for carts.
Right.
The fact you have mass-produced, standardized pottery proves something vital about the society.
What does it prove?
That a specialized class of craftsmen now existed.
Oh, because to sit at a wheel all day making hundreds of identical bowls, you can't be out in the fields digging irrigation ditches.
Exactly. These people weren't farming, they were manufacturing full-time.
Wow.
And they could only do that because the agricultural surplus managed by the central temple was rich enough to feed them while they worked.
So the farmers are feeding the potters.
Right. You now have a specialized economy.
Yeah.
Farmers, potters, priests, soldiers.
That is a huge leap in complexity.
And when you have an economy that complex, with massive agricultural yields being brought to the central temple for storage and redistribution to these specialized workers.
You need a highly reliable way to track it.
You have to.
Because if the potter doesn't get his grain ration, he starves.
Yep.
And if the farmer claims he brought in his quota but didn't, the temple starves.
Exactly. The trust inherently breaks down at scale.
So how did they track it?
Before shoe writing, they tried to solve this with cylinder seals.
Cylinder seals? What are those?
They were small, beautifully carved stone cylinders. You'd roll them over wet clay to leave a unique picture.
Like a stamp.
Basically a cryptographic signature.
Oh, that's cool.
One of the earliest uses of these seals was to physically certify the size of crop deliveries when they were received in the temple.
Okay, so how did that work in practice?
You'd seal the storage jar with clay and then roll your unique signature over it to say, I, the priest, verify this contains 10 bushels.
It's a primitive receipt?
Yes. It's physical proof of a transaction.
But I'm guessing that wasn't enough.
No, as the economy grew even more complex, just stamping seals wasn't enough.
You need more detail.
Right. You needed to record quantities, types of goods, dates, and debts.
So what did they do?
They started drawing simplified pictures, pictograms, on clay tablets using the edge of a cut reed stalk.
Which becomes writing.
Yes. And it's vital to note what they were actually writing down.
Okay.
The first writings were not poetry.
Right.
They were not philosophical treatises on the nature of the cosmos.
They were economic memoranda.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Lists of goods, ledgers of cattle, tax receipts.
It's essentially ancient accounting software.
That is the perfect way to put it.
If you think about the initial promise of blockchain technology today.
Oh yeah, the distributed ledger.
Right. It wasn't invented to write novels or make art. It was invented as a distributed, immutable ledger to audit transactions securely without a middleman.
Right.
Early writing was the exact same impulse. It wasn't invented for self-expression. It was invented for audits.
Absolutely.
And I have to admit, I find it a tiny bit depressing.
Depressing. Why?
Well, arguably the greatest intellectual leap in human history, which historians often rank right alongside the invention of agriculture or the steam engine.
Yes.
It was essentially invented by middle management tax collectors.
I get that, but I'd frame it slightly differently.
Okay, change my mind.
It's easy to look at a ledger and see, boring bureaucracy.
Right.
But you have to see the life and death stakes behind that ledger.
Life and death.
Those tax collectors were literally ensuring the survival of the species in that region.
Wow.
Think back to the environment we just discussed. The irregular rain, the sudden violent floods, the devastating multi-year droughts.
Right, the trap.
The only way 50,000 people could survive in a dense urban environment like Uruk was if the Central Temple successfully managed the surplus.
So if the math was wrong?
People died. They had to store massive amounts of grain for the lean years, redistribute it fairly to the potters and the soldiers, and manage the unbelievably complex year-round operations of irrigating the land over changing seasons.
Okay, that is high stakes.
Without the ability to consult a permanent record, without ledgers to tell them what they had in reserve from 3 years ago, that entire fragile system would have collapsed within a single bad harvest.
Wow. So if human memory fails, everyone starves.
Yes, writing was their external hard drive for survival data.
I really like that. External hard drive for survival.
And literacy in its early stages was both unsettling and stabilizing.
How was it unsettling?
Because it created a new class divide. It cemented the power of the literate priestly castes who monopolized this new technology.
Oh, of course. If you can read the ledger, you control the food.
Exactly. Knowledge is literal power.
But you said it was stabilizing too?
Yes, because for the first time in human history, institutional practice could be standardized across generations.
Meaning?
You didn't just have to rely on the oral tradition of a village elder trying to remember how they handled a severe drought 20 years ago.
Right, like I think my grandfather said we do this.
Exactly. Instead, the priest could go into the archive, pull up the baked clay tablets and consult the exact administrative record.
So they had a database.
Writing allowed for the efficient intergenerational exploitation of resources. It kept people alive.
Okay, when you frame it as a survival mechanism, the tax collectors start to look a lot more like the heroes of the Bronze Age.
They kind of were.
But thankfully for us, they didn't just stick to receipts forever.
No, they didn't.
Because the tool they invented, pressing a wedge-shaped reed into clay, began to evolve.
It became much more abstract.
The pictograms became abstract symbols representing sounds, a system we call cuneiform.
Yeah, so cuneiform.
And once they mastered this phonetic writing to track their grain, they started using it for something much deeper.
This is where it gets really beautiful.
That they started using it to grapple with the terrifying, unpredictable world around them. And this gives birth to the first literature, the first theology, and honestly, the first action hero in recorded history.
Oh, absolutely. We are, of course, talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yes.
This is a staggering piece of human history.
Tell me about it.
Well, the core tales appear in Sumerian times, and we know it was being written down soon after 2000 BC.
Okay.
Though the most complete version we have, the standard Babylonian version, was compiled later, around the 7th century BC.
Got it. And Gilgamesh was a real guy, right?
What's incredible is that Gilgamesh was almost certainly a real person, an actual historical ruler of the city of Uruk.
But the stories about him are wild.
Right. In the epic, through the power of this new technology of writing, he is transformed into the first true individual and the first tragic hero in world literature.
Now, for anyone who has ever brushed up against Gilgamesh, the thing that always strikes them immediately is the flood.
The Great Deluge.
Yeah, the narrative features a cataclysmic flood unleashed by the gods to obliterate mankind, and a favored family who survive by building a massive boat, taking animals with them.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
The parallels to the biblical story of Noah in Genesis are impossible to ignore. I mean, they are almost beat for beat identical in their mechanics.
The parallels are striking, and historians universally acknowledge them.
Is it the exact same story?
Well, it's worth noting, from a literary perspective, that the flood story wasn't originally part of the oldest Gilgamesh texts.
Really?
Yeah, it was actually incorporated later from a separate, even older Sumerian poem called the Epic of Atrahasis.
Oh, fascinating. But why was a flood such a big deal for them?
Well, it makes perfect logical sense why the flood became the central, defining mythological event for these people.
Oh, because of the rivers.
Exactly. As we discussed, Lower Mesopotamia constantly, physically struggled with devastating floods that threatened to destroy their fragile, life-giving irrigation systems and drown their walled cities.
So a flood for them wasn't just a bad weather day or a ruined basement.
Not at all.
It was a literal, existential threat to the fabric of reality they had built.
Yes.
It returned the order of the city back into the watery chaos of the swamp.
Precisely. To the Mesopotamian mind, the flood became the ultimate, terrifying symbol of general disaster and divine wrath.
That makes total sense.
And this constant looming threat helped foster what scholars see as the defining psychological characteristic of Sumerian religion.
Which is what?
A deeply pessimistic fatalism.
Okay, explain what you mean by that.
The universe, in their eyes, was fundamentally capricious and hostile.
It was out to get them.
Basically, yeah. And the afterlife they envisioned was incredibly bleak.
How bleak are we talking?
Their vision of the underworld was not a place of reward or even fiery punishment. It was a gloomy, sad, eternally stagnant place.
Ugh.
The texts describe it as, quote, the house where they sit in darkness, where dust is their food and clay their meat. They are clothed like birds with wings for garments. Over bolted door lie dust and silence.
That is just incredibly grim.
Very grim.
Dust for food and clay for meat. You spend your whole life digging in the clay, and your eternal reward is to eat it in the dark.
That was the reality they believed in.
And their gods were just as terrifying as their afterlife, right?
No, entirely.
You've got Anu, the distant father of the gods, Enlil, the lord of the storm and the air, who is often the one trying to wipe out humanity.
Right.
Enki, the god of wisdom and sweet waters, who sometimes helps humans.
He was the nice one, relatively speaking.
And Ishtar, the fiercely unpredictable goddess of love and war.
And you have to connect this theology directly back to the geography.
Always back to the dirt.
Always. Why did they view the gods as these terrifying, volatile forces? Because of where they lived.
Right.
Lower Mesopotamia was a flat, monotonous landscape of mudflats and marsh stretching to the horizon. There were no sheltering mountains, no gentle rolling forests.
Just flat exposure.
There was only the flat earth and the empty, terrifying heavens above. They faced the remorseless, baking summer sun. They faced overturning winds and massive dust storms with absolutely no natural protection.
And the floods.
And those irresistible floodwaters and equally lethal lightning droughts.
Yeah.
When your physical reality is dominated by lethal extremes, of course you believe the gods that control those courses are elemental, capricious, and largely indifferent to human suffering.
The gods were unpredictable because nature was unpredictable.
Exactly.
It makes complete psychological sense. If the river can wipe out your entire city without warning, despite all your hard work, you do not imagine a loving, gentle, paternal god.
No, you don't.
You imagine a terrifying alien force that demands to be appeased just so it will leave you alone for one more season.
That was exactly their relationship with the divine. The Sumerians believed, fundamentally, that humans were created for one purpose.
Which was?
To labor for the gods.
Really?
Yeah. The gods didn't want to dig the irrigation canals themselves, so they made humans out of clay to do the heavy lifting.
Wow, so we're just free labor?
Humans existed to serve. And they had to submit to elaborate, constant rituals at the temple just to coax a baseline of prosperity and a decent lifespan out of these terrifying deities.
So they weren't praying for heaven.
They didn't pray for a glorious afterlife. They prayed to survive today.
And the historical weight of this fatalistic worldview is profound.
It really is.
Even long after Sumer fell as a political entity, its language and its theology lived on.
Sumerian became the language of learning, much like Latin in medieval Europe.
Interesting.
Yeah, it lived on in scribal schools for centuries, silently passing down these religious frameworks like the creation of land emerging from a watery morass, or the Great Flood deep into the cultural DNA of later Middle Eastern cultures, eventually finding its way into the texts of the Hebrew Bible.
I want to push back on this narrative of complete fatalistic acceptance, though.
Okay, let's hear.
Or at least look at it from a different psychological angle. Let's look at another character in the Gilgamesh epic, Enkidu.
Oh, Enkidu is fascinating.
Right. When we meet Enkidu, he's this wild man of nature. He runs with the gazelles, he eats grass, he has no concept of cities or laws.
He is pure, untamed humanity.
Exactly. Then he is seduced by a harlot from the city, Shumhat. Through this encounter, he gains self-awareness and wisdom, but the animals reject him.
He can never go back to the wild.
Right. He is brought to Uruk, he is clothed, he eats bread, he drinks beer, and he becomes civilized.
Yes.
But he ultimately suffers and dies because of his entanglement with the gods and the city.
It's a tragic arc.
It is. And when I read that arc, it sounds to me like an ancient, society-wide psychological trauma.
A trauma.
Yeah, it's like they are mourning the loss of their hunter-gatherer origins.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective.
They are looking around at their mud brick walls, their grueling, back-breaking agricultural labor, their ledgers and their terrifying gods, and they are writing a story about how much freer and simpler it used to be before they invented civilization.
Wow.
So my question is, were the Sumerians actually, on some level, regretting the very civilization they were building?
That is a brilliant psychological reading, and the historical context absolutely supports that interpretation.
Really?
Yeah. The Epic of Gilgamesh is entirely dominated by a somber, melancholic mood.
Right. It's not exactly a happy story.
No. Gilgamesh and Enkidu do great things. They slay monsters, they cut down the cedar forest, but it's all part of a restless, ultimately doomed search to assert themselves against what the ancient texts explicitly call the iron laws of the gods, which ensure human failure.
Iron laws of the gods, which ensure human failure.
Iron laws of the gods, which ensure human failure. That is heavy. It is. Gilgamesh searches desperately for immortality, and he fails.
So they felt trapped.
The Sumerians accepted civilization as their inescapable destiny. They knew it was the only way to survive the physical environment, but they absolutely recognized the heavy, fatalistic price of being separated from the natural world.
Wow.
Enkidu's story is a profound mythological processing of that transition from the Neolithic hunter-gatherer to the Bronze Age urbanite.
That makes so much sense.
They knew they could never go back to running with the gazelles. The agricultural trap had snapped shut, but they felt the profound loss of that innocence.
Because civilization was hard.
Civilization provided bread and walls, but it was also a trap of endless labor, taxation, and anxiety.
It's amazing how modern that
Oh, it
feels.
does, doesn't it?
That sense of alienation from nature, the anxiety of the daily grind, the feeling that we've built a complex machine that we can no longer escape.
We're still dealing with that exact same feeling.
Which actually makes me want to examine the reality of that machine.
Let's do it.
We've talked about their terrifying theology, the macro level of survival, and the invention of writing.
Right.
But how did these people actually live day to day in the cities they built?
What with the daily grind?
Yeah. What was it like to walk the streets of a place like Uruk or Mari in 2500 BC?
Well, the historical record offers a surprisingly vivid picture of their daily routines.
It does, because I just picture everyone covered in mud all the time.
No, not at all. Primarily through visual evidence.
Okay.
Through their beautifully carved cylinder seals, their statuary, and intricate wall paintings, especially from the later palace at Mari, we get a remarkable glimpse into their daily lives and aesthetics.
So what do they look like?
Visually, we see men and women dressed in what appears to be fringed, furry garments, likely sheepskin or goatskin, often worn as skirts.
Sheepskin skirts, got it.
Yeah, and the women are sometimes depicted throwing a fold of this material over one shoulder. Interestingly, the men are often, though not always, depicted as clean-shaven.
Really? Clean shave.
Yes, which suggests a level of personal grooming and perhaps specialized tools for shaving.
Okay, so they weren't just wild men in the mud, they had razors.
Exactly.
And it wasn't all just toiling in the mud pits and fearing the gods 24/7. There is clear evidence of leisure and comfort, right?
Yes, very much so. There is a famous surviving piece of artwork depicting a banquet or a drinking party.
A drinking party in 2500 BC.
Oh, yes. It shows a group of men sitting in armchairs, actual recognizable furniture, holding cups, while a musician plays a stringed instrument to entertain them.
That sounds like a modern Friday night.
And we know exactly what they were drinking in those cups.
What was it?
Beer.
Beer.
The Sumerian word for alcohol has survived, along with detailed, written recipes for brewing beer.
Think about the logistical complexity behind that image.
It's massive.
Right. To have men sitting in armchairs drinking beer, you need carpenters to craft the chairs.
Yeah.
You need musicians who are trained, meaning they aren't farming. You need a massive, reliable surplus of barley, specifically diverted for fermentation. And you need the brewers.
It's a whole industry.
Men sitting in armchairs, drinking beer, listening to live music. That is 5,000 years ago. You could walk into a pub in London or a bar in New York today and see the exact same human behavior.
It does make them feel much less remote. The fundamental human desires for comfort, intoxication, and entertainment were fully realized in these early cities.
That's incredible. And when you look closely at their social structures, particularly regarding marriage, family, and the law, there are elements that feel surprisingly familiar.
Yes, and frankly, some elements that are quite progressive compared to what came much later in history.
Really?
Yeah. The basic unit of society was the patriarchal family. Marriage was strictly monogamous, and it was a highly formalized institution, arranged via a sealed legal contract.
A written contract.
Usually focusing on the consent of the bride's family and the exchange of bride price and dowry.
But the crucial point here is that women were not viewed simply as property or mere chattels, right?
Correct, and this is a vital nuance when studying ancient history. Legal and literary evidence strongly suggests that in early Sumerian times, women were significantly less downtrodden than they would be in many later Middle Eastern or even European societies.
That's so interesting. So they had actual legal standing.
Yes.
Okay.
Sumerian common law gave women important, codified rights. They could own property, they could engage in business independently, and they could act as witnesses in court.
Wow.
The law even extended legal protection to the slave mother of a free man's children, ensuring she couldn't just be arbitrarily discarded.
That is surprisingly advanced. What about divorce?
Divorce arrangements also show a surprising level of equity. While a man could divorce his wife, a woman also had legal avenues to seek a separation, particularly for neglect or abuse.
Really?
And she was often entitled to take her dowry back with her, providing her with financial security.
I want to be careful not to paint it as an ancient egalitarian utopia, though.
Oh, definitely not.
Because the adultery laws, for instance, were incredibly one-sided.
They absolutely were. A wife's adultery was considered a grave crime, often punishable by death, typically drowning.
Yikes.
While a husband's infidelity, unless it was with another man's married wife, was largely tolerated or punished far less severely.
That is a massive double standard.
It is. But historians clarify that this stark double standard was primarily rooted in deep societal anxieties over inheritance and property rights.
Oh, tracing the bloodline.
Exactly. In a patriarchal system where land and wealth are passed down the male line, ensuring the absolute legitimacy of heirs was paramount.
Right. They didn't have DNA tests back then.
The harsh laws against female adultery were fundamentally about protecting the integrity of the bloodline and the property, rather than just arbitrary sadistic cruelty.
That makes sense historically, even if it's brutal.
But what is really striking about studying this era is the tragedy of historical regression.
Explain that. What do you mean by regression?
Well, we have this ingrained modern assumption that history is a steady, unbroken upward march of progress.
Right, that things always get better, more enlightened, and more equal as time goes on.
Exactly. But the reality of Mesopotamia proves that is a myth.
How so?
It was not until long after Sumerian times, as the societies became more militarized and different empires took over, that Mesopotamian law began to heavily emphasize the overarching importance of virginity, to drastically restrict women's economic independence, and to impose the physical veil on respectable women as a legal requirement.
So it went backwards.
Later societies actually became more restrictive, imposing a much more cramping, subjugated role on women than the early Sumerians did thousands of years prior.
That is a sobering thought.
Progress is not guaranteed, and it is certainly not linear.
That fundamental human rights can be lost just as easily as they are gained, depending on the political winds.
It's a scary historical lesson.
It really is. Now, we also have to talk about their technical ingenuity.
Oh, yes.
Because beyond administration and law, they were wildly inventive in ways that still shape our reality.
The innovations are staggering.
We already discussed the potter's wheel, which eventually, crucially, evolved into the wheel used for transport carts and chariots.
Which is huge on its own.
But they also gave us positional mathematics.
Yes, and this is a monumental cognitive leap.
Break that down for us. What is positional mathematics?
Positional mathematics is the concept that a number's value changes based on its position in a sequence.
Okay, give me an example.
For example, in our system, the 1 in the number 100 means something completely different than the 1 in the number 10.
Right. It represents hundreds instead of tens.
Exactly. Without positional value, you are stuck with systems like Roman numerals, which are incredibly cumbersome for complex calculations.
Ever tried doing long division with Roman numerals?
It's basically impossible.
Right. So the Sumerians figured this out, but instead of a base 10 system like we use, they used a base 60 system known as a sexagesimal system.
Yes, sexagesimal.
Why 60? It seems like such an arbitrary number compared to 10, which matches our fingers. I mean, we have 10 fingers, that makes sense.
It seems arbitrary until you look at the math. 60 is what mathematicians call a highly composite number.
Okay.
Think about how many numbers divide evenly into 10. Just 1, 2, 5, and 10.
Right.
If you try to divide 10 by 3, you get 3.333 repeating. It's messy.
It is.
But 60 is evenly divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30, and 60.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of clean divisions.
Imagine you are a temple priest trying to divide a massive shipment of grain or a plot of land among various groups of workers. You don't have a calculator.
Right.
A base 60 system makes dealing with fractions incredibly clean and efficient.
That makes total sense now.
It is an incredibly powerful, elegant operating system for commerce and administration.
And it was so effective that it survived the fall of their civilization.
Which is exactly why we still use it for our geometry and our clocks today.
That is incredible. So they give us the wheel, they give us advanced positional mathematics, they invent the manufacturing of glass.
Yes, early glassmaking.
And then, crucially, they figure out how to cast bronze.
This is a huge turning point.
Yeah. And as we were preparing for this deep dive, you pointed out something about bronze that completely changed how I view the society.
The logistics of it.
Yes. The existence of bronze implies something massive about their worldview and their capabilities.
It implies a staggering scale of early globalization and complex supply chains.
Which is not what you expect in 2500 BC.
Not at all. Here is the physical reality. Bronze is an alloy. To make it, you must smelt copper and tin together at very high temperatures.
Okay.
But if you look at the geological map of southern Mesopotamia, there is no metal, none.
None.
There are no copper veins, there are no tin mines, there is just mud, reeds, and water.
So to equip an army with bronze weapons, or to make bronze tools to carve stone, they had to import 100% of the raw materials.
Exactly. Every single ounce.
Wow.
And not just from the next village over. To get copper, and especially tin, which is quite rare. They had to establish a widespread, highly organized network of contacts, crossing immense, dangerous distances.
Where were they getting it from?
We have archaeological and written evidence showing they were trading overland with the Levant and Syria to the west.
Okay.
They were sending ships down the Persian Gulf to Bahrain and Iran.
Ships?
There was even documentation revealing direct contacts with the Indus Valley civilization in modern-day Pakistan and India well before 2000 BC.
India? That is thousands of miles away.
Exactly. To get the materials required to pull themselves out of the Stone Age, they created an international trading system of profound interdependence.
So what were they trading away to get this?
They were exporting textiles, grain, and manufactured goods in exchange for timber, precious stones, and metal.
They were an export economy.
They weren't isolated mud hut dwellers terrified of the horizon. They were international merchants operating a massive maritime and overland logistics network.
So I look at all this, I look at this society.
Yeah.
They have advanced base 60 mathematics to calculate compound interest. They have complex, equitable divorce laws. They have international shipping lanes reaching all the way to India.
It's incredibly sophisticated.
They are drinking specially brewed beer in crafted armchairs. They seem so incredibly advanced, so rational, so close to us.
Right.
And yet, the historical record also details the burial practices of the early Sumerian kings and queens at the city of Ur.
Yes. The Royal Cemetery of Ur.
And it is absolutely horrifying. With all this advancement, all this rationality, why did they feel the need to routinely bury dozens of their attendants alive with their dead monarchs?
It is a jarring juxtaposition, isn't it?
It's horrible.
But it brings us right back to that deep, unshakable existential dread we discussed earlier.
The fear of the dark.
Yes. The excavations at the Royal Cemetery of Ur, dating to the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, revealed the so-called death pits.
Death pits, just the name is awful.
When a king or queen died, they were followed down into their massive tombs by their courtiers, musicians, guards, and servants.
So like the people who poured the beer and played the music.
Exactly. These attendants were then buried with them, likely after drinking a soporific or poisonous mixture from small clay cups found near their bodies.
They were buried alive, or at least poisoned to die in the tomb.
Yes.
Why would an advanced society do this?
Because, as we established, their theology held that the afterlife was absolute, miserable darkness. Dust for food, clay for meat.
Right.
If you genuinely believe, with every fiber of your being, that you are heading into an eternity of bleak, desolate darkness, a royal figure would believe they absolutely needed to take a massive retinue.
So they were trying to bring a piece of civilization into the dark with them.
Exactly. They needed their musicians, their armed guards, their gorgeous gold and lapis lazuli jewelry, and all the physical comforts they could gather to ensure even a tiny shred of status or comfort in that dark place.
Wow.
All of their advanced math, their international trade, their wheeled carts, none of it cured their fundamental terror of the universe and what came after death.
The technology advanced exponentially, but the psychological terror remained completely constant.
The technology advanced, but the psychological terror remained constant. That is the perfect summary.
That is a chilling image. You can calculate the movement of the stars, but you are still terrified of the dark.
Human nature at its core.
And this tension, this accumulation of massive wealth and power mixed with fear, transitions us perfectly into the next major phase of this history.
A very violent phase.
Right, because as these isolated city-states grew richer, as those trade networks to India expanded and the grain surpluses piled higher, they became incredibly lucrative targets.
Huge targets.
The era of the priest-king, managing the local irrigation ditch and appeasing the local god, gives way to a much more violent era, the era of the warlord and the empire.
Yes, the political structure begins to mutate under the pressure of wealth and competition.
How does that shift happen?
Historians broadly divide Sumerian history into 3 phases, starting with the Archaic period. Initially, Sumerian city-states might have operated with some representative, almost democratic elements.
Like voting?
More like councils of elders making communal decisions.
Okay, that makes sense.
But as the scale of the cities grew and the usable land shrank, they faced constant existential emergencies.
Over water and land, like we talked about.
Mostly, these were brutal, protracted wars with neighboring city-states over access to borderlands and, most importantly, water rights.
And a council of elders is probably too slow for a war.
Exactly. During these intense emergencies, the slow consensus of a council wasn't enough. They needed decisive military leadership.
A general.
So the cities would appoint a temporary warlord, a lugal, or big man, to command their forces for the duration of the conflict.
A lugal. I love that. Big man. But let me guess how human nature played out here.
I bet you can.
When the emergency was finally over and the border was secured, the warlords decided they rather liked being in charge and commanding the troops.
You nailed it. The temporary martial law became permanent.
Shocker.
The warlords did not give up their power when the emergency passed. From these temporary military commanders stemmed enduring dynasties of kings, distinct from the early priestly rulers.
So this is a huge shift in power.
Massive. The palace emerged as a rival power center to the temple.
And this accelerating militarization of society culminated in a transformative figure, right?
Yes, Sargon the Great.
Sargon the Great. Who was he?
Sargon was a king of the Semitic city of Akkad, located somewhat north of the traditional Sumerian heartland. Around 2334 BC, he didn't just win a border dispute, he conquered all of Mesopotamia and inaugurated the Akkadian supremacy.
The way you describe Sargon, he sounds like a ruthless corporate raider executing the first hostile takeover in recorded history.
That's a very apt comparison.
He didn't just win a battle and go home with some loot. He changed the entire organizational and political structure of the region.
He truly did. Sargon created what historians generally recognize as the first true empire in human history.
The first empire? That's a big title.
It is. His rule wasn't just about Uruk bullying Ur for a generation. He achieved a degree of political and economic integration across a huge geographic area, stretching from the Persian Gulf in the south up through Syria, and perhaps exerting influence as far as the borders of Egypt and Anatolia.
That is massive for that time period.
And he achieved this using massive, professionalized military force.
Not just farmers with pitchforks.
No. The historical records boast that Sargon had 5,400 soldiers eating daily before him in his palace.
We have to pause and appreciate the logistics of that.
Please do.
To feed 5,400 standing professional soldiers every single day, you can't just rely on voluntary tribute.
Nope.
You need a massive, highly efficient bureaucracy. You need standardized taxation, secure supply lines, granaries, and administrators working around the clock just to maintain the army.
Exactly. The administrative burden of empire is staggering.
So how did he do it? How did he conquer everyone?
Sargon maintained his dominance by equipping these soldiers with new, disruptive military technology.
Oh, military tech? Like what?
The texts specifically credit the Akkadian military success in part to their use of the composite bow.
Explain the composite bow. Why is it a game changer compared to just a regular bow and arrow?
It's a leap in applied physics.
Okay, lay the physics on me.
A regular bow, a self-bow, is just a single piece of wood bent by a string. Wood is okay at bending, but it has a strict physical limit to how much energy it can store before it snaps.
Right. I've broken a few sticks trying to make bows as a kid.
Exactly. A composite bow is a masterclass in material science. They took a wooden core and glued animal horn to the belly of the bow, the side facing the archer.
What horn?
Horn is incredibly resistant to compression. Then they glued animal sinew to the back of the bow, the side facing the target.
And why sinew?
Sinew is incredibly resistant to tension, stretching like a rubber band.
Oh, that's brilliant.
When you draw a composite bow, you are compressing the horn and stretching the sinew, storing vastly more kinetic energy than wood alone ever could.
So it snaps back with way more force.
The result is a weapon with drastically increased range and armor-piercing penetrating power. Sargon's archers could outrange and outpunch the older Sumerian phalanxes.
So he basically had ancient sniper rifles compared to their muskets.
Pretty much. But perhaps Sargon's most lasting impact was structural.
The empire itself.
Yes. This era sees the definitive physical split between secular and religious authority. You start seeing massive, fortified palaces rising right beside the temples in the city centers.
So the king is no longer pretending to just be the humble head priest.
Exactly. The palace has its own standing army, its own taxes, its own power base, completely separate from the temple's grain silos.
The administration of power was splitting into church and state?
Even though the king still claimed the ultimate blessing of the gods? Yes.
Wow.
Now, Sargon's Akkadian hegemony, despite its composite bows and massive armies, didn't last forever. No empire does.
How long did it last?
It fell after about 200 years, overrun by mountain peoples.
Oh. The mountains strike back.
Always. This was followed by a brief Neo-Sumerian revival centered on the city of Ur, which then itself fell to invaders from Elam around 2000 BC.
Lots of turnover.
What follows this are centuries of absolute chaos. The historical texts describe the Middle East during this period as a maelstrom of groups pushing into it from all sides. Amorites, Hittites, Kuchins, Kassites.
It's just a total free-for-all.
It is a massive, confusing churn of migration, climate shifts, and warfare. But out of this violent chaos, a new, glittering center of gravity eventually emerges.
Which is?
The city of Babylon. And with it, a name everyone recognizes. Hammurabi.
Hammurabi. Yes, this is a name that echoes through history.
It really does.
We all learn about him in middle school because of his famous code of laws. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
Right.
He comes to power in Babylon around 1792 BC. But I want to ask you about how we should actually view him historically.
Okay, let's look at the nuance.
Because his code is famous, 282 distinct articles carved onto a massive 8-foot-tall black stone style for the public to see.
Yes, it's a very impressive artifact.
It deals with everything.
Yeah.
Minimum wages, divorce proceedings, property rights, even penalties for medical malpractice by early surgeons.
It's very comprehensive.
But if you read the historical texts closely, the physical penalties under Hammurabi actually got harsher and more violent compared to the older, earlier Sumerian traditions.
That is true.
The older traditions often favored monetary fines for offenses. You mess up, you pay a fine.
Yes, compensatory justice.
But Hammurabi was like, no, we cut off your hand. So I have to ask, should we really celebrate Hammurabi as this great, enlightened champion of justice? Or was he just a very organized, very brutal tyrant enforcing state terror?
That is the essential, fascinating tension when studying Hammurabi. And the history helps nuance this view beautifully.
Okay, nuance me.
First, we have to clear up a major modern misconception. Hammurabi did not invent these laws.
He didn't write the code.
He wasn't sitting in his palace acting as a philosopher king, drafting new legislation from scratch.
Now, where did they come from?
The evidence makes it clear that his code was a compilation and a declaration of existing law. He assembled and standardized rules that were already current across the various cities he had conquered. It was the crystallization of centuries of common law.
So if he didn't write the laws, what was his actual lasting innovation? Why do we remember him and not the guys who came before him?
His monumental innovation was publishing them openly and claiming universal jurisdiction.
Putting them on the stone stills.
Yes. He had these laws carved onto massive stone stills and placed them publicly in the courtyards of temples across his empire.
So everyone could see them.
His explicit aim, stated proudly right on the stone itself, was so that the oppressed man who has a cause can read carefully my inscribed still, and may his heart set him at ease.
Okay, that sounds pretty noble.
This represents a monumental, paradigm-shifting move toward objective, codified justice.
Explain the shift. What was it like before?
Before this public codification, if you had a dispute with your neighbor over a property line, you were entirely at the mercy of the local priest or the village headman's arbitrary, subjective judgment.
Right, it was just his opinion.
He could rule against you just because he didn't like your family. Now, the law was fixed in literal stone. You could point to the pillar.
It's the transition from a society ruled by because I said so to a society ruled by because it's the written law. It removes the capriciousness of the judge.
Precisely. Furthermore, by Hammurabi's time, the judicial process had largely moved out of the temple's control.
Oh, secular courts.
Yes. Non-priestly, secular courts were becoming the rule, administered by town notables and royal judges. And crucially, citizens could appeal local decisions all the way to Babylon, to the court of the king himself.
So there was an appellate process.
Yes. So to answer your moral question, yes, the physical penalties, the eye for an eye retributions, the mutilations for various crimes were demonstrably harsher than earlier Sumerian practice.
Right.
But it was a complex societal trade-off.
A trade-off for what?
The ancient people traded harsher, stricter rules for a judicial system administered with far more procedural fairness, predictability, and protection from arbitrary local corruption.
It's a fascinating trade-off. We want fairness, even if the rules themselves are brutal.
Exactly.
But we cannot talk about Babylonian law or Mesopotamian civilization as a whole without confronting the very dark, ugly reality that underpinned this entire glorious structure.
No, we cannot.
The historical texts do not shy away from this. Civilization, as they built it, from the canals to the walls to the palaces, rested almost entirely on slavery.
It did, and it is a reality we must look at clearly. The texts are unambiguous.
What do they say?
Babylon, like virtually every other ancient civilization that followed it, rested on a massive institutionalized exploitation of man by man.
Where were they getting all these slaves?
War captives were the primary source of this labor. When a city was conquered, the survivors were frequently destined for slavery, along with their families, for generations.
Brutal.
By the time of the First Babylonian Empire, there were regular, highly organized slave markets operating in the cities, with standardized prices for human beings recorded in the economic ledgers.
And it is so hard for us to comprehend this today. We take it as an absolute moral given, the bedrock of our modern ethics, that chattel slavery is abhorrent.
Of course.
But for them, it seems it was just the unquestioned background radiation of their reality.
It was. It was the only conceivable way they knew how to run a complex society. Think about the physical labor required to sustain this world. The massive monumental architecture, the towering stepped ziggurats, the palaces with walls 40 feet thick, the endless dredging of the hundreds of miles of canals.
You can't just hire a contractor for that.
It was all built on the backs of forced labor.
Did the slaves have any rights under Hammurabi's code?
The legal codes do note that some Babylonian slaves had surprisingly narrow legal rights. A slave could, under certain conditions, own a small business, marry a free person, or even own other slaves themselves.
Well, that's slightly different than the Roman or American models of slavery.
It is different, but their master's ultimate hold on them, their ability to be bought, sold, or punished, was virtually absolute. It is a grim, heavy reality to process.
It really is.
The historical consensus explicitly states that it is hard to feel anything but profound pity for the endless lines of bound captives depicted on ancient victory memorials. But the brutal truth is that the ancient world literally did not possess the technology or the sociological imagination to sustain the massive scale of civilization they had created without forced human labor.
It's a heavy truth to sit with. All of this incredible human progress, the invention of writing, the codification of law, the building of cities paid for in blood, mud, and bondage.
Yes.
Now, moving forward in the timeline, Hammurabi's political empire, much like Sargon's before it, eventually crumbles. The wheel of history keeps turning.
As it always does.
But the intellectual empire that Babylon built, especially when those priests looked upward at the night sky, that intellectual empire would essentially conquer the world, outlasting their walls by millennia.
Babylon's intellectual and cultural legacy is truly staggering. First, just on a physical engineering scale, the civilization became legendary across the ancient world.
Give me an example of the scale.
The texts mention the Great Palace of Mari, a city allied with and then conquered by Hammurabi. This palace had walls 40 feet thick, encompassing over 300 rooms.
300 rooms? That's a mega mansion.
And this detail is incredible. It featured complex internal drainage pipes lined with bitumen that ran 30 feet deep into the earth.
The sheer scale of their engineering mastery was breathtaking. But I have to stop at bitumen pipes. What exactly is bitumen, and how are they doing municipal plumbing thousands of years before the Romans?
Right. Bitumen is a naturally occurring, highly viscous, semi-solid form of petroleum, essentially natural asphalt or pitch.
Okay, so like tar.
Yes. It seeks out of the ground in certain parts of the Middle East. The Mesopotamians realized that if you heat it up, it becomes a perfect, impermeable waterproofing agent.
That is genius.
So they would construct elaborate clay pipe networks inside these massive multi-story mud brick palaces and coat the inside with boiling bitumen.
They essentially engineered advanced municipal plumbing and waterproof drainage systems while large parts of the world were still living in temporary shelters.
Exactly.
That is just brilliant applied chemistry, and their intellectual pursuits match this engineering brilliance.
They refined the older cuneiform script into a much more flexible syllabic form, allowing for nuanced diplomacy in literature.
But as you mentioned, their absolute crowning achievement, the thing that changed human history forever, was in the stars.
Yes, astronomy.
They birthed the hard science of astronomy, but they did it through the incredibly unscientific lens of astrology, didn't they?
Yes, and the mechanism of this evolution is fascinating. It began deep in the temples.
What were they looking for?
The priests were initially just watching celestial movements, the moon, the sun, the visible planets, to announce the advent of crucial agricultural events.
Like when to plant the crops?
Like fertility festivals and the exact timing for sowing seeds. But because of their fatalistic theology, they also firmly believed they could read the will of the gods, particularly their patron civic god Marduk, in the movements of the stars.
Oh, so if a star is at a place, Marduk is mad.
Exactly. If Venus was low on the horizon, perhaps Marduk was angry and a drought was coming.
But here is the ultimate beautiful synthesis of religion and science. In their desperate, fearful attempt to accurately predict what the terrifying gods were going to do next, they started keeping meticulous, generation-spanning records of planetary movements.
Decades and centuries of data.
Over centuries, these astrological omens morphed into massive databases of hard mathematical data. Superstition accidentally birthed rigorous empirical observation.
It is the most beautiful irony. By trying to read daily horoscopes and divine the mood of Marduk, they accidentally invented astrophysics and orbital mechanics.
That is an incredible historical irony.
That's essentially exactly what happened. By the 1000 BC, their records were so vast and accurate that they could mathematically predict complex celestial events like lunar eclipses.
Predicting eclipses is wild.
Soon after, they had plotted the apparent path of the sun and the planets against the fixed stars with remarkable mathematical precision.
And I bet processing this massive amount of astronomical data required entirely new math.
Oh, absolutely. They worked out complex mathematical tables and developed an algebraic geometry of immense practical utility.
Like what?
They used this data to invent the sundial to track time during the day.
No.
And as we mentioned at the very beginning of this deep dive, they passed down that brilliant sexagesimal system, the base 60 math system, that still gives us our 360-degree circle and our 60-minute hour.
They literally mathematically coded the operating system for time and space that humanity still runs on today. Every single time I set a 60-minute timer on my phone or look at the GPS coordinates on a map, I am running Babylonian code.
It is wild to think about.
It is. But despite all this brilliance, despite the deep pipes in the eclipse predictions, Hammurabi's dynasty ends.
It does.
The historical texts note that Babylon was sacked and overthrown by the Hittites shortly after 1600 BC.
Yes, the Hittite invasion.
And this is the part of history I always struggle to wrap my head around. How does a society with advanced algebra, composite bows, impenetrable walls, and the ability to predict the movements of the cosmos just vanish beneath a wave of invaders?
It happens because technological and intellectual advantages are often temporary, and they are rarely enough to stop the sheer demographic weight of mass migration and warfare.
Just numbers winning over tech.
The history emphasizes that the Middle East, during this time, remained a violent maelstrom. New kingdoms, new peoples, the Amorites, the Elamites, and eventually the Hittites.
Who are the Hittites?
The Hittites were an Indo-European people sweeping down from Anatolia, and they possessed their own massive technological advantages.
Like what?
They had mastered the light, horse-drawn war chariot, which revolutionized battlefield mobility.
Ah, tanks of the ancient world.
And they were beginning to pioneer the smelting of iron, which is vastly superior to bronze.
So Babylon was incredibly wealthy, but geographically, sitting on that flat plain, it was vulnerable.
When the Hittite king turned his armies south, Babylon's bronze and algebra couldn't stop iron and chariots.
The city was taken.
Its walls breached and was violently plundered.
So they just got wiped off the map. The grand experiment of Mesopotamia just ends.
No, and that is a crucial, vital distinction that historians make. The political empire of Babylon fell.
Okay.
The physical city was plundered. The sacred golden statue of their god Marduk was literally carried off as a trophy.
Ouch.
But the civilization itself did not vanish. It was absorbed.
Absorbed.
Yes. The texts explicitly note that the heritage of Sumer and Babylon passed in strangely transmuted forms to their conquerors.
Oh, so the Hittites learned from them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Hittites, for example, didn't burn the libraries. They took up the cuneiform script and adapted it to write their own Indo-European language.
That's fascinating.
They adopted Babylonian legal concepts and administrative techniques. The conquerors were educated by the conquered.
Wow.
The physical subsoil of the Mesopotamian mudflats had become the cultural subsoil of the entire Middle East. They didn't disappear. They became the foundational DNA for everything that followed, from the Assyrians to the Persians to the Greeks.
They became the DNA of the ancient world. That is a perfect way to look at it.
It really is.
Well, we have covered an immense, staggering amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started with terrified, vulnerable villagers banding together to pile up mud in a malarial flooding swamp just to survive.
The forcing house.
We watched those survivors invent specialized labor, mass-produce standard pottery on the first wheels, and create the first ledgers and receipts to stave off starvation.
The first external hard drive.
We saw them evolve that ledger into the first epic literature, grapple with the trauma of leaving nature, build massive walls, and establish global trade networks reaching to India.
An incredible trajectory.
We watched warlords use composite bows to turn into emperors, and we saw Hammurabi carve objective law into stone.
For better and for worse.
And finally, we saw them look up at the stars in fear and accidentally invent the mathematics of time itself. They truly, literally laid the subsoil of human civilization.
It is an unparalleled legacy. When you look at it technically, intellectually, legally, and theologically, they lift a stamp on the human condition that has never been erased.
So the next time you glance at your watch to see how many of your 60 minutes are left in your lunch break, or the next time you hear a myth about a massive world-ending flood, I want you to remember that you are touching a 5,000-year-old unbroken chain. A chain that stretches all the way back across time to those muddy, sun-baked banks of the Euphrates River.
It's a humbling thought.
Before we go, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought from the source material to carry with you.
This is a good one.
We talked extensively about how the Babylonians viewed their gods and their own ultimate purpose in the universe.
Right, the fatalism.
The historical texts highlight a very specific, recurring detail from the Babylonian creation myth. In their view, the gods did not create humans out of love or a desire for companionship.
No, not at all.
They created humans for one specific reason: to do the heavy lifting. In one literal version of the myth, the gods turned human beings out of clay molds, stamping them out like identical, mass-produced mud bricks, specifically to do their grueling manual labor. In their eyes, we were manufactured purely to work.
We were just tools.
I want you to mull that over. Because even today, in our hyper-modern, technologically advanced society, we constantly talk about the epidemic of burnout.
We talk about it all the time.
We talk about the endless, exhausting grind of work. We talk about the feeling of being just a cog in the machine. And I have to wonder, is that modern anxiety really just a product of 21st century capitalism?
Or is it something older?
Right. Or is it a psychological hangover deeply embedded in our cultural DNA from a 5,000-year-old worldview that decided at the very dawn of civilization that human beings were merely invented to be a workforce?
That is a haunting question to end on.
Something to think about the next time you punch the clock. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.